tangle of cords, so I'm going to disappear just for a moment to move the cords out of the way.
Where did she go? Somebody going after her.
Okay, that's easier. I want to thank Cindy and Keep Grapevine Beautiful for having me out tonight. I'm just so thrilled that there's so many of you here tonight to learn about Texas natives, and I hope I can answer all of your questions and maybe even generate some new ones you hadn't thought of. I love Keep Grapevine Beautiful. You guys do a fantastic job, and we like working with them, and hope they have a very successful month of April with all their events. I'm actually going to talk not just about the plants. I want to start off by talking a little bit about why you should plant native, what are the benefits of planting natives, and I have some of my own ideas that I've kind of been working on over the last few years about how that relates to sustainability and stuff like that. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. My personal mission, if you will, is to promote not just Texas natives, but sustainable landscaping, and what I call backyard biospheres. That's one name that's been thrown around for a while. There are other names for it, but basically it's a concept that incorporates more than just Texas natives, but Texas natives are the foundation of all the rest of it. So so to start with, they're basically, can I switch the view on this so I can see my notes? Is there a way for me to do that, or can I, because right now I'm just seeing my slide, not the notes.
And if you, to my understanding, then I'll be going through that.
Oh, okay. Then I won't have to talk. I'll just have to wing it. Okay, never mind. I know the topic.
No, she would like
No,
to see her
I was
notes.
hoping I could see my notes.
Your
pages
notes.
while
Yes.
I present without them having.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, no,
Oh, he's got it.
We're going to use a Mac and have stuff out there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a Mac person.
Yeah, I'm not either. Still have one though.
There we go. That's my notes. Okay, I want to see that. That works. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Technology break. But anyway, sustainable landscaping is basically using Texas natives and using organic practices. And as I talk about this, you'll understand why it's so important that that we move in the direction of organic programs for your landscape, because really anything else is self-defeating. If you want to have a pollinator garden, which is a big reason why a lot of people want to have a native garden, if you want to eat vegetables that haven't been treated with chemicals, if you want to help with climate change, there are a myriad of reasons why organic practices are really the only way to go. And you know, there's really no point in putting out vegetables that you're going to eat to grow yourself and then spray them with toxic chemicals. So you're really, and you're impacting, when you're treating your yard with any kind of chemicals, you're impacting our groundwater supply, you're impacting all of your neighbors. Anything that you spray is going to overspray onto other areas and potentially end up on somebody else's food, and so on and so forth. You're going to be, ahead of me here. Let's see, can I scroll down here? Oh, I see what I did. Sir, you can't go any further. Okay. So anyway, you really want to consider that if you're not already. How many of you are already organic? Nobody. 3, 4, 5. Okay, we've got some work to do here tonight. So, how many of you want to have a pollinator garden? Okay, a few more. Okay. And how many of you are growing vegetables for your own consumption? Okay. And how many of you would like to consume toxic chemicals? Okay. I didn't think so. So one of the reasons why people are so persistent about wanting to use those kinds of things is because we've been taught, at least I certainly was growing up, that all bugs were bad. And so if I saw a bug, you know, my mother would scream, "Kill it!" And you know, if I didn't, I would get punished, so I killed it. But the truth is that these are statistics that come, by the way, from Texas A&M. 97% of all the bugs in your garden are going to be either beneficial or innocuous. There are very few bugs that are actually harmful to your plants, and virtually zero that are harmful to you. And except for fire ants, but they're not native. They're invasive. And when we talk about pollinators, we tend to focus on honeybees and monarchs. And the truth is that there are more than 4,000 species of native bees that live in Texas or in North America as a whole. And none of those are honeybees. Honeybees are imported, so those are not native. The native pollinators are actually better at pollinating our gardens than honeybees are. They're more attracted to the native plants. They're drawn to those. They would prefer to pollinate a native plant than an exotic plant. And when they do pollinate, they do a better job. So I don't know where our tech guy go, because I'm not able to quite see all of my notes here, and I don't know how to get this view down here. I can only see the first paragraph. Oh, it's over here. Okay. All right. Here, but I want to see what's down here. Oh yeah, for me it is. Maybe not for you.
Got my readers on. We're good.
Okay, there doesn't seem to be any way to do that. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Anyway, our conventional thinking about gardening is that our backyards should be clean. They should be raked, they should be mowed, they should be trimmed. Our patios should be swept. We shouldn't have any kind of debris anywhere around. And basically, we want it to be as clean as the inside of our homes. And that's, besides the fact that the wind blows here all the time, and that only is going to last for 30 seconds if you're lucky. It's just, it's not practical for one thing. But with organic gardening and sustainable landscaping, you have to get used to the idea of letting nature do its thing. And that can be a difficult transition. If you're used to having everything be neat and tidy and everything and all of that, it can be difficult to think about letting your bushes grow in their natural form rather than shearing them back or not going out to sweep your patio every day or spraying things to keep the bugs off. But that's really the key to becoming organic and becoming sustainable. We're actually in the concept of backyard biospheres is really as much about gardening for yourself as it is about creating habitat, restoring habitat, and using your garden as a little micro habitat that you can use to help preserve our pollinators and provide space for other wildlife that we need in our environment to really, fight climate change and help the planet and all those kinds of things. So the 4 elements that you would need to have in your garden to really truly make it sustainable would be to have food for the animals that live in your yard, your insects, your I hate squirrels, but yeah, squirrels, things like that. Birds need, like your wild birds, one of the things that they need are shrubs that are bushy for them to hide in when they're not at the feeder. What they usually do is they come to the feeder and they eat a little bit, and then they'll go retreat for a little while into the bushes, and then they'll come back and eat some more. If they sense any kind of danger, they're gonna fly away. They need a place to hide if a cat comes through your yard, something like that. They need a place to retreat to. So providing them with shrubs for cover and things like that, those are all elements of a backyard biosphere in a truly organic, sustainable landscape. Nesting sites for birds, nesting sites for squirrels, nesting sites for rabbits. All of those things are in your neighborhood, whether you realize it or not. You just don't necessarily see them. They really hope that you don't see them, so they're gonna hide from you, except for squirrels, which are totally obnoxious. But I know some people love them and they are cute, but they can also be very destructive. But yeah, that's the thing, is you have to learn to take the good with the bad. If you're gonna have a sustainable landscape, you have to be willing to allow the things that you don't like into your garden as well as the things that you do like. So that's what makes it difficult, really, I think, for most people, is getting used to that idea. If you're gonna, if you don't like squirrels, too bad, you're gonna still have squirrels, unless you take drastic measures. So water is another thing that a lot of us forget about. Providing a bird bath or some kind of water source. If you are going to do water, though, you have to be careful that you're not attracting mosquitoes. So you have to keep it fresh, and you have to keep it, basically every day you have to put fresh water in there, because otherwise you're going to invite mosquitoes to lay their eggs in it. So those are the 4 elements that you would need to have a complete sustainable landscape. And I mentioned that one of the goals of sustainable landscaping is to use our backyards to help replace habitat that's been lost. And then we can't go back and tear down all the houses that we built or kick people out of Texas, although some of us might want to do that. We can do quite a bit just within our own backyards to restore it. The other thing about habitat is a lot of habitat is degraded, is the term they use for it. And what we mean by that is there's just not enough biodiversity in that area. And this is an example of a yard that has virtually no diversity. Everything is evergreen. You have a whole bunch of plants that are all the same. You have a whole bunch of boxwoods that are all trimmed and neat little rows and everything. And stylistically, it's very attractive. But in terms of the wildlife in the neighborhood, it's close to useless. I mean, there's nothing blooming. There's no water. There is cover for the birds, but why would they even be there in the first place? There's nothing to eat. So they're not gonna hang around. You'll still have squirrels, no matter what you do. You'll still have squirrels. But that's, that's about it. So one of the elements is incorporating enough plants so that you can have a fair amount of biodiversity. You're not going to be able to represent every possible thing in one backyard, but one of the concepts behind backyard biospheres is that you can actually work together with your neighborhood, work with other people in your neighborhood to, okay, I don't have a place for water, but you have a pond or you have a water feature. You can be the water source, and I'll be I'll have nesting sites, and that sort of thing. So you don't have to do everything yourself, especially if you can get together with people like Keep Grapevine Beautiful to coordinate things like that and expand the habitat beyond just your backyard. But fundamentally, it's about what you can do within your little plot of land. And so native plants are, like I said earlier, the foundation for that. And I think I already mentioned this, that studies they've actually done a number of studies that have shown that wildlife prefers their native plants to non-native plants. The insects, other animals, birds, bees, butterflies, pretty much everybody that's native to Texas prefers Texas native plants. So the other advantage is that planting natives is going to be less maintenance. If you let your plants grow to their mature size and allow them to be their natural shape, that's going to reduce your maintenance versus being out there trimming them into very shapes like we were looking at here. You can also lower your water use because native plants are going to take less water, less fertilization. If you're using organic fertilizers, you're going to use less water also because most chemical fertilizers are loaded with salt, and salt actually steals water from your plants and pollutes the soil, kills off the microorganisms in the soil that you need to have healthy soil and healthy plants. You can't have healthy plants if you don't have healthy soil. And so the organic products are free of those things. They're going to provide basically the difference between organics and chemicals is with chemicals, you're trying to force the plant to consume nutrients, putting nutrients on the plant, hoping that the plant will soak them up and if you give it nitrogen and put on more foliage, that sort of thing. Whereas with organic products, what you're really trying to do is make the soil healthy so that the plant can do what it's meant to do. So you're not really fertilizing the plants as much as you're fertilizing the soil, adding beneficial organisms to the soil, restoring all of the lost micro life in your soil, so that your plants need those things to properly take up nutrients that are there. So those are really critical things, and your plants are going to do better. Your water bill is going to go down. So there are just a lot of good reasons to do that. Also, you're going to have fewer problems with pests and diseases because the native insects and birds and whatnot are going to help you in your landscaping to control anything that does try to attack your plants, any kind of insect invasion. Things like ladybugs, will come in and help you clean it up. If you have scale or mealybugs or whatever on your roses, the appropriate predator bugs will come in and consume all of that and help you clean it up. So you don't have to spray so many chemicals on your plants. they're also going to be, because they're going to be healthier to begin with, they're going to be more resistant to disease. So you're going to have less problems with them down the road. They're going to live longer and look better in the long run. So the next thing is, okay, so have I convinced you yet? Are you ready to plant native plants? Okay. I think you were already convinced about that before you came. So one of the handouts I had was on shade plants. A lot of Texas natives, unfortunately, a majority of Texas natives are really full sun plants. And I brought some to show you here. Is it all right if I put these up here, Cindy? You took them off, so.
People back here
Oh, you
just
can't see, okay. So I will bring it down here then. This is an Indian hawthorn plant. This is a Texas native. A lot of people lost their Indian hawthorns during the freeze. I know, so we've had a big demand for people wanting to replace those because they're unfortunately not tolerant for temperatures, you know, at like -2. They're not made for that, but they are drought tolerant. They're a very pretty shrub that blooms for several months of the year, and they also have berries on them, so they're good for a lot of purposes. But it's a true Texas native, and one of the things about them is that, you know, like I said, they like full sun, so they don't like overhead watering. They'll get fungus if you water the foliage. They'll almost invariably get fungus. They don't like to be planted too close together. A lot of people like to plant them as a hedge and put, you know, several in a row. But when they're touching each other like that, they don't get enough air circulation, and so they get fungus on them, and they get black spot and stuff like that. So that's another reason why it's good to let your plants grow naturally instead of, you know, shearing them and stuff like that. You're going to have less disease problems and things like that because you're not going to have that confined space that prevents water from evaporating and prevents air from circulating. Another consideration besides sun versus shade is soil type. Texas natives like the native soil. They don't have to be fertilized like azaleas and hydrangeas. If you don't fertilize the heck out of them, they're not going to bloom. Azaleas and hydrangeas both need acidic soil. Most of us have clay soil, and clay is alkaline, and so the azaleas and hydrangeas and all that don't bloom very well in the native soil unless you supplement it with some kind of supplement to make the soil more acidic. So soil type is an important consideration when you're picking out plants to grow. So think about your overall landscape. Where do you want to plant? Where do you have sun? Where do you have shade? That'll help you figure out what kind of plants are going to go best in those areas. Unfortunately, some people have, you know, a lot of shade, and that can be really difficult because even the shade-loving plants need some sunlight. Nothing grows in a dark closet except, well, nothing. Mold. Mold. That's it. You want to think about whether you have any kind of drainage issues. Do you have places where water pools after a rain? Or does everything drain properly? You know, stuff like that. Do you have rocky soil in places? Some of us have kind of a mix. My place is all clay all the time, but some people have areas that are maybe more sandy than others, you know, or more rocky than others. You can also create those kinds of spaces with soil amendments. So if you wanted to have a rock garden in a clay backyard, you could still do that. You could, there are ways that you can add things to the soil to create that kind of an environment. So if you wanted to grow succulents, like the agave. These guys, this is an agave. Yuccas, all of your cacti, all of those kinds of things, they want to have more rocky soil. And they'll do very well here as long as, as long as they can have really good drainage and stuff like that. So, there are things you can do to make plants fit into your environment. You just can't, there's just certain things that you can't do. But that's certainly one of them. Another important consideration is how are you going to water them? Like I was saying, most people just rely on their sprinklers to water. And that's fine for your lawn, but one of your handouts should be the 3 worst watering mistakes. Did I send you that, Cindy? I'm not sure I sent that one. But we find that a lot of plants die because they get too much water. Most plants, especially Texas natives, once they're established, don't need much water. And so, if you're overwatering, a plant will die much faster as a result of overwatering than underwatering. If you underwater a plant, it'll get sort of wilty and looking and all that. But if you water it, within a few hours, it'll spring back to life. If you have a plant that's sitting in water, in a pool, where the water pools or something like that, where it can't drain, the roots are actually going to suffocate and they will die in like a few hours, and it won't recover. And it'll look like it needs more water. It looks the same to you, but really, if it's already wet and it's wilted and it's been more than a couple of hours since you watered it, then it got overwatered. And so that's the mistake that a lot of people make, is that they overwater their plants. Usually with your Texas natives, once they're established, and you have to water more when you're getting plants established, but once they're established, most of them can go on 1 inch of water 1 time a week. And that's true for your lawn. And actually, that's one of the ways that you can help make your plants stronger, is not only to have good soil, but when you water correctly, if you water lightly, say you water, a lot of people do this, so I don't mean to single anybody out or make fun of you or anything, but I mean, this is very common. People water their lawns like 3 times a week, and they water lightly 3 times a week, and it may, their lawn may look green, but what's happening underneath the soil is that the roots are actually staying up near the surface of the ground, because that's where the water is. They actually come up out of the soil to try to get to the water. So you've actually weakened the plant, because the plants should be going down. They should be pointed down into the soil, and they should be trying to grow downward, or maybe sideways, but certainly not coming up to the surface. And so when you water deeply but less often, you train your plants to go downward to find more water, because as the water drains down, the roots have to follow it. And so they actually will grow downward more. And that strengthens your plants, because they're not going to get knocked over in the wind. They're not going to, if there is a drought and you can't water for some reason, they're already going to be ready for it, because their roots are already trained to grow in the right direction. And it's especially bad with trees, because their roots go so much deeper than most other plants. So again, if you've got a big tree and you're just lightly watering the top with with your lawn sprinklers, the roots of that tree are never going to be deep in the ground like they should. They're gonna be up near the surface, and a big wind comes along and the tree gets knocked over. That's often the reason why it gets knocked over, is because the roots are too shallow. So watering is very important, erosion control, thinking about what's already there, and then unfortunately the last couple of years, one of the things that we really have to get people to think about is what's available for you to buy, because since COVID happened, the supply chains on everything have been disrupted, and because of the freezes that we've had the last couple of years, a lot of plants died. Even our growers lost a lot of their plant stocks. So a lot of plants that we would normally have are just not available right now. It's good to be flexible and to say, okay, I'm gonna shop and I'm gonna buy what they have, instead of, you know, saying I've got to have this plant or I'm not going to be happy, because you may or may not be able to find it over the next couple of years. Our growers have actually told us that because they had to, during COVID, they had to pull from their back stock, from their little plants, because it takes about 3 years to grow this big of a plant at the grower level when they're starting from scratch. This plant is like 3 years old already. So, you know, during COVID, they were pulling plants from their nursery stock that were like 2 years old to fill the demand during COVID, and then the freeze came, and they had already pulled stuff, and so they didn't have anything to go back, you know, fall back on. When the freeze happened, and then so many people lost their plants, the demand just went up even more. So, you know, I would suggest that you consider what's actually available, rather than and be flexible, rather than, you know, saying I've got to have these specific plants. Think about what colors and textures you like. There's so many options with Texas native. Some of the ones that I really like myself, this one here is an Esperanza, and didn't spill. I made a mess, but
We're supposed to get used to messes.
that's right. Get used to messes. But this is a Gold Star Esperanza. This is a Texas native, and it's actually native to the Edwards Plateau area, but it does very well in our area as well. And it gets pretty big. It's like, it can be like 5 feet tall. It's kind of a droopy plant. It doesn't stay upright like a tree. It kind of flops over a little bit, but not draping all the way to the ground, and has these beautiful yellow bell-shaped flowers on it. It's also called the yellow bells, thank you. And it comes in orange as well. So there's if you don't like yellow, there's kind of a tangerine color it comes in. But that's just one of my personal favorites. If you want a pollinator plant, I'm not blocking the screen, I hope. This is an abelia. This is called an abelia. There are a number of different kinds of abelias. They come in a bunch of different sizes. This one is a variegated one. It's sort of a lime green on yellow color. It produces tons and tons of little tiny pink or white flowers, depending on which variety you get. And the pollinators, last year, oh my gosh, we had a whole section of these in our nursery, and last year the plants they bloomed from like April to September. And the whole summer, they were covered in like hummingbird moths, bumblebees, all kinds of butterflies. They attract tons of pollinators. So this is a great plant to have.
That one get?
This particular one is the called a kaleidoscope. It's a smaller one. This one is labeled to be 2 to 3 feet high by 3 to 4 feet wide. There's another one called a glossy abelia that's much bigger. It's more like 6 by 6, but they all have tons of flowers on them when they bloom. Yes, ma'am.
How do you spell it?
Abelia. And this particular one is called Kaleidoscope. We have about, right now in the nursery, we probably have about 6 different varieties of abelias, but they're all going to just be covered in these little tiny flowers in the spring, summer, and fall. So let me move ahead here. These are all pretty good ones for hot, dry areas. Ones, I have one for shade here. And here. Bring that here. This one is called a Mahonia. There's several different kinds of Mahonias. This is a smaller one. There's one called a leather leaf one that has much bigger leaves. They're kind of spiky on the edges, but this one is called Soft Caress. But they bloom even in the shade, and they also produce berries that the birds really love.
How big does it grow?
This one is going to be pretty small. This one is only 3 feet by 3 feet. And it will take some sun, but it prefers the shade, just not deep shade. So those are just a few examples. Weather obviously is always a problem here in Texas. You need to consider some plants are only available, like some are only available in spring, some are only available in fall. Depending on, like with us, in order to get competitive pricing and those kinds of things, we have to be able to order lots from the same place, lots of things from the same place at the same time, so that affects what we can actually bring in at a particular time. We can't just go back and get one plant from the grower. We have to get like half a truckload. So, if we're going to be placing an order anyway, we might be able to accommodate you. But if you're, and this is true for all nurseries, not just us, but we all do it that way. But if you're, if you really want a particular plant, you kind of have to think about when is that plant in season and stuff like that in order to find it, because it's not going to be available in like December. You're not going to find it. Just nobody has anything in December. So those kinds of things. Another thing is when you bring in exotic plants, you also have problems with Texas agriculture, because there are a lot of restrictions. A lot of plants can't be sold in Texas. So you might be able to find them on eBay, but they may not ship it to you because of because of where you live. And it's very complicated. I tried to get a list from Texas A&M and from the Ag Department on exactly what's invasive and what isn't, and they couldn't even give me a list. So it's very vague and hard to figure out on some of these plants that people come in and say, I want this plant, and it's like, well, we can't even get it. It's not for sale in Texas. So, those kinds of things can also affect if you're trying to bring in exotics. So that's another reason to just be native. Then you don't have to worry about it. The other thing too is that plants can be invasive in one part of Texas and not in another. So there's things like, this isn't an invasive problem, but like with milkweed, most of the growers only sell one kind of milkweed. It's the what's called the tropical milkweed that grows very well in South Texas. And a lot of the growers are down there, so that's what they grow. But it doesn't do that well up here. We sell it more as it usually comes back, but you know, if you have a winter like we did last year, it'll probably die. But the thing is that it goes back to the biodiversity thing. If everybody's just planting tropical milkweed and nothing else, the monarchs aren't really getting what they need, because they need the diversity of the different kinds of milkweed plants. And that's one of your handouts, is what are the best milkweeds for North Texas, because it's different for us than it is for Houston. And it's different for us than it is for Austin, you know, so we're trying to work with our growers to get them to grow more of the right kind of milkweed for us, so that they're not just selling the tropical milkweed, so that we can have more biodiversity for the monarchs. And the monarchs, as most of you probably already know, have to have milkweed. That's the only plant that they will lay their eggs on. And so if they don't have milkweed, they're gonna go extinct. And their numbers are already declining. So the more milkweed that we can plant, the better. Let's see, what have I got here? Just some more on some of the plants that you might want to have in your garden. I brought some pictures of what they look like in the landscape. So hopefully this is helpful to you. This one here on the far left, that's standing up with the purple spikes flowers on it, that is a type of sage. There are a lot of different sages that grow here, that are native here, and that's just one of them. The autumn sages, Salvia gregi is the official name. It's also called autumn sage, comes in a huge variety of colors. It's basically, the plants are all the same shape and size, but the flower colors are different. So everything from purple to red to pink to white. Some are bicolors, so instead of, you know, just purple, you get purple and pink on the same flower, stuff like that. So there's a huge range of color choices, even within one category of plants, that you can pick from. And you can plant a bunch of different kinds of sages in different parts of your yard and get completely different effects, and still have a fair amount of biodiversity. I also have in that picture, I think those are succulents in the front there. Autumn joy sedum, I think, is what that is in that picture. The yellowy stuff growing closer to the ground there. Sedum is a succulent. Like all your succulents, it's drought tolerant, really easy to take care of. No maintenance, no trimming, nothing, just, you know, hardly ever water it and it'll be happy.
Cold and hardy?
Cold, not so much, not so much. Most of your succulents are not as cold hardy as some of the other plants. The Esperanza is not real cold hardy either. The ones that are cold hardy, when I say cold hardy, I'm not talking about, like, you know, upstate New York or, you know, northern Canada. Cold hardy for us is like 30 degrees. So anything below that, a lot of plants are really gonna start to struggle, you know. So that's why so many things died when we got to -2, because it just doesn't ever happen here. The plants aren't adapted for that. But other ones I have in the pictures here, there's some in the front on this one. I can't see that. I'm sorry. No, that. This one here. I can't
tell whether it's dry.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
But let's see, it looks like there's some Russian sage in there, which is another kind of sage. There's rudbeckia in there, black-eyed Susan. There's some butterfly weed in there. And somewhere I saw Texas bird of paradise. Some of the other ones that would be good for hot, dry areas would be like a moss rose or vitex. Vitex is a really great plant that you can even shape into a tree form. That's a really big shrub that can be like 15 feet tall, and if you prune it the right way, you can make it look like a little tree. So kind of like a crepe myrtle, be an alternative to a crepe myrtle, smaller one. Lavender grows really well here. It's not especially native, but it grows well here. It's very well adapted. A lot of herbs like that, rosemary, oregano, thyme, all of those are perennials. And you can plant those in your flower beds and use those both as culinary and ground covers or you know, other decorative plants. They look, you know, because they look great in the landscape. Rosemary has beautiful blue flowers on it. And then, let's see, what else? Pentas are another, butterfly magnet. Pentas are an annual. So most of us like to mix in at least a few annuals here and there in our gardens. That's a great one for hot, dry areas. It loves the summer heat. Takes full sun, full west sun, and it attracts pollinators like crazy. So that's a really good one if you like annuals. But I would especially encourage people to try to find some places for milkweed in your yard, just for the monarchs, because there is so much lost habitat, so few places where they can get to their milkweed. Here's another couple of pictures of plants that do well in hot, dry areas. There's, oh, this is the autumn joy, I'm sorry, the purple, the great big pom-pom purple flowers or maroon flowers. That is actually a sedum. Rudbeckia is the yellow. There looks like maybe some, there's definitely some artemisia in there, which is a good mosquito control plant. It's also good at helping to, if you companion plant it with roses, it'll help control black spot and stuff like that. Also, society garlic is a great one for helping to control fungus in your soil. Around, if you plant it close to your roses, it will help prevent black spot on your roses. Cone flowers, those are definitely natives. Ornamental grasses are something that I never liked until I moved to Texas, and really learned to love those. I have a couple I brought. And this is another one that comes in a million different shapes and sizes. This is a lower growing one that's obviously single color, dark green. The purple, this is purple fountain grass. This gets a whole lot bigger in the landscape when it's allowed to. It gets probably 4 feet by 4 feet. The seed heads, it doesn't flower because it's a grass, but it produces seed heads, and the seed heads turn purple in the fall, and very beautiful, especially when there's a light breeze, and they sway in the wind. They're very pretty in the landscape. And other good ones for hot, dry areas, a fall bloomer is aster. fall aster. If the native variety is actually kind of a pesky weed that grows in your lawn, little purple flowers, not the, I shouldn't say, they look more like daisies. The purple ones are actually another type of weed, but the little daisy ones that grow in your lawn, close to the ground, they're easy to pull out, but they're everywhere in the fall. That's the native aster, but it's been hybridized, and all of these plants are hybridized versions of the natives. Very few plants are, the true original native. Almost everything has been hybridized, but the asters are particularly spectacular in the fall and look so much different from the weeds in your lawn. It's almost hard to believe that it's the same type of plant, because it's so much different. But those are some that do well in hot, dry areas. I mentioned abelia already. That's what the flowers look like when it's in bloom. Literally just covered in flowers like that. Butterfly bush is a Texas native. They haven't come in yet, so we don't have any right now, but that has great big spike flowers, kind of like a panicle hydrangea or something like that. Lots of little flowers on one stem, and butterfly magnet. All the butterflies, we see the swallowtails on them, but it should attract all kinds of butterflies. I mentioned Salvia greggii, that comes in, that's the autumn sage, that comes in a million different colors. Blackfoot daisies are fantastic for if you have a place where you just don't ever want to have to bother with it, like out by your sidewalk, somewhere where it's up against the concrete, excuse me, or up against just a hot, super hot sidewalk, or right next to your house where it's, just unbearably hot in the western sun, and you don't want to have to go out there and water it. Blackfoot daisies are your plant. They love, like the strips out in front of your house, between the sidewalk and the street, where it's really hot and it's surrounded by concrete. That's where they like to be. And once they're established, they'll go all summer without water. So they're a really great one for hot, dry areas. For shade, you should have a list of shade plants, but here's what some of them look like in the landscape here. There's on the left side, right in the front of the picture, is Aurelia. That's actually a Japanese plant, but it does well here. It's an adapted plant. The other one on the right-hand side is Nandina. That's, some people are starting to consider that to be an invasive, but it's still very popular and it's not illegal or anything, so you can still plant it. It does very well. Some people call it heavenly bamboo. It's another one that has pretty red berries on it that the birds like, especially the green guys that come through in this, the waxwings come through in the springtime and strip all your berries off of your holly and whatnot. They love the Nandinas. There's a fern in the front here on that one. I forget what it's called though, I'm sorry.
Foxtail.
Foxtail, thank you. There's also, let's see, on the far one over here, behind the Aurelias, is a plant called a farfugium. It's also known as a leopard plant. That one happens to be solid green, but the reason they call it a leopard plant is because some of them are green with yellow spots on the leaves, and so they look like leopard spots, I guess.
You're talking about the tall one in there?
No, on the far picture over there, behind behind the second plant, not the first plant in the front, the one behind it, it has relatively big leaves, kind of like a palm-shaped leaf, and it puts up a big tall flower spike with a yellow flower on it when it blooms, and it loves the shade, so that's a good one for shade. Another one in this far picture in the corner, it's a little bit hard to see because it's in the corner of that house there, is an umbrella plant. Umbrella sedge it's a type of grass, but it grows really tall, so it's kind of a jungly type of a looking plant. Japanese maples, even though they're Japanese, everybody loves them. They're just spectacular in the landscape. You can grow them as a specimen. They do really well, the smaller ones do really well underneath another tree. So, you know, like if you can get weeping varieties that actually come up and then, you know, turn back down again, or smaller ones, they're upright but they're smaller. They do very well underneath other trees. There are also really big Japanese maples that can be 30 feet tall, but mostly people plant the smaller ones as what they call an understory underneath another tree. And you can get different, like even the wood on the tree can be a different color. Some of them have a reddish bark versus regular, you know, brownish tree bark. Other great ones are for ground cover in the shade. Ajuga is very popular. That's what's in this picture on this side. The ground cover that's growing around the Nandina is called ajuga. It will flower if it gets enough sun, but people usually plant it in the shade so it doesn't get that much sun to bloom. How do you spell the ajuga?
Yeah.
A-J-U-G-A.
Thank you.
And let's see, and begonias and caladiums, they do really well in the shade too. Those should be on your list there if you have that. And then other great ones for the shade are the oak leaf hydrangea. That's the actual native hydrangea that's native to Texas, or well, native to North America anyway. And then the American beautyberry, which is another kind of it's a woody deciduous shrub that it has long stems that kind of bow as they get longer and get weighted down by the berries and whatnot. They bow out, but the berries are what make it so pretty, more so than the flowers, and the birds again love the berries. So that's a great one to have if you like to attract the birds. And it's another shade-loving plant that you can grow without, you know, like I said, most people want things to bloom, but the reason to plant the American beautyberry is for the berries, because the flowers aren't really all that spectacular. It's the berries that are really cool.
Do you carry that?
We will. We don't have any right now. But yeah, there are a lot of plants that we should have.
When is the time that those are typically in stock?
We should be getting them in over the next month or so. So definitely check with us. They don't produce the berries until fall. So they wouldn't be, you know, they wouldn't have the actual fruit on them, but they would still be in stock, hopefully, if we can get them. That's the hard thing.
Is it cold hardy?
It's very cold hardy, actually. It's deciduous, so it'll die back in the winter time. It'll lose all of its leaves and die back and basically just be a stick. But it usually comes back in the spring. Even with our -2, most of them came back. So, you know, hopefully we won't have any more winters like that. And then other great ones for shade, yarrow is an herb, And so you can also use that for medicinal or culinary purposes. But it can also be, there's the true one, the native one is just a white flower, but the hybrids have really cool different, this is a bicolor, and there's some other ones. Let's see, sorry, I hit the wrong button here. And then spiderwort is a true native. We actually have that growing wild behind our store along the creek. There's a creek that runs behind us, and there's a lot of spiderwort back there. So, we do also sell it in containers, but that's a true native that grows wild around here. Rock rose, if you like sandy, if you want to do like a West Texas type landscape with succulents and things like that, a good combination would be rock rose. It likes rocky, sandy type soil, hot and dry again, out in the full sun. But when it's allowed to grow to its mature size, it can be just really beautiful, covered in these pink blooms. I've seen it blooming in landscape, and it doesn't look like much in the nursery because it's in a little pot, and it's usually got like one flower on it. But in the landscape, it can be just really beautiful. And then if you have moist areas that are wet a lot, Asian jasmine is a ground cover people like to grow. It's not native, but it does well here. The southern blue iris, which is what the picture is, loves the moister soil. It'll take a lot more moisture than the rest of your irises. Most irises, most of your bulb plants, if they get too wet, they'll rot in the ground. The southern blue iris will take a lot more moisture than that. The cannas are another good one for wet areas. And then there's a particular type of milkweed called swamp milkweed that grows around Grapevine Lake. I've seen it growing out there, and that really likes moist soil too. So that's most of my presentation here. Just to sum everything up, I hope you'll all consider being organic if you're not already, and go toward a more sustainable landscape environment for yourself and for the planet and all that. If you want to work with your neighbors, like I said, if you want to share a water source or something like that, that's a way to kind of extend things in your neighborhood. You can talk to your HOA or talk to Keep Grapevine Beautiful about ways that you can coordinate with other people. But the most important thing, really, for all of this to work properly, you really have to be organic. And because, like I said, if you're not organic, you're killing our pollinators. Every time they drink nectar from one of your flowers, they're slowly being poisoned. And so it's really critical for them that we try to use fewer chemicals in our landscapes. So I hope this was interesting to everybody, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any other, yes, ma'am.
I just want to add one thing, that pretty much every plant she talked about and more are going to be available on April 23rd for Grapevine Garden Club plant sale by the Botanic Garden from 9 to 2. And we use the money for scholarships. So, and there'll be good plants.
Yep. We have your sign up in our store for the plant sale.